Let's talk about taxes. Personally, but this is just me. I was hoping to hear something in my favor, and I didn't hear it. No real tax relief for the individual. Not much said by way of company taxes. We heard a little bit about sort of sin taxes, a fuel levy, and a new gambling tax. He doesn't have much room to maneuver, but could he have just done a little bit?
Look, there was a bit of bracket adjustment, but really only enough to forgive people for the impact of inflation in terms of the wage bill. You know, I don't know. I mean, it's very interesting how Pravin Gordhan at least acknowledges in his speech that the parties that do all the paying ought to be thanked for their contribution. I mean, I did a calculation as a business owner and as a salaried employee. I personally contributed 2 million rand to the fiscus last year, and you know, I thought to myself, well, what could I have otherwise done with 2 million rand? You know, I could have bought myself a Lamborghini like Kenny Kunene. I could have gone on some, you know, high-end holidays or bought a property in the Drakensberg. But you know, that's my portion, and I think all things being equal, you have to understand that in a modern economy of this nature, we have a progressive tax system. The parties that are lucky enough to be employed in this country or lucky enough to be part of generating an economic surplus need to pay their part, because we know our history and we know that many, many people live in grinding poverty, and the kind of social grants, as low as they are what people have to live on. So, you know, I think, sure, it would be nice not to have to pay any taxes, but all things being equal, what we pay, at least you have the sense that it's being well directed.
I mean, obviously a developmental take on what our taxes do in a country like this. A few more people now paying tax, but we still had a shortfall of about 18 billion. So the government's still got a major challenge when it comes to revenue collection. What are the options available to them, because also the taxpayer is looking for some sort of a rebate, is looking for a little bit of relief?
Yeah, of course SARS is trying to get as much as it can, and that's all right. I mean, that's from the efficiency point important. But there's not much scope after that, and I think we are probably reaching a ceiling as far as that is concerned. I don't think we should go the route of increasing tax rates. In terms of the global environment, I think we are relatively high, certainly amongst our peers, whether you look at income tax or whether you look at VAT. So unfortunately, and maybe the point wasn't really emphasized enough, is that delivery, effectiveness, do more with what you get. That should really be driving the fiscus going forward.
For investors in particular, they were looking for a little more clarity, for instance, a respite on dividend taxes, for instance. Others are saying when you're restructuring a company because you're investing abroad, you know, you run the risk of double taxation on the shares that you're now offering, on the assets that you may be selling off, and they're looking for a little more clarity. Should he have provided more clarity?
He could have done a bit more on that front. Exchange control issues were omitted from the speech, but it has been a theme of the last few budgets, so one can give it a skip for 1 year, and next year we'll probably see exchange control feature in the speech again. It was the only issue on our expectations list that wasn't mentioned at all. I believe that there was an expectation in the market that he would have mentioned a few double taxation agreements to alleviate those pressures. The restructuring side, it's not a whole range of companies, it's a very narrow range, so one could forgive that omission, that it didn't command the level of priority against the other issues that one would have expected. But at this time in our economic cycle, when we depend very heavily on international business to contribute to domestic economic activity, it could have had a significant impact. We believe as a chamber that the only way to trigger domestic activity is by greater involvement in international markets, and that is where the huge benefit would have come from.
South Africa is at the moment a consumer-driven economy. It's the consumer who's driving growth. So when we're told that there's a likelihood of VAT increasing to subsidize other areas of government activity, does that bode well?
No, I guess not, although VAT, remember, is quite a regressive tax. In other words, it's a burden which is carried quite significantly by the poor. So to some extent, if VAT is going up, that would be seen as a positive thing from the perception of the elites, you know, gathered here today.
without Lamborghini?
I think, though, I mean, what's interesting is the VAT issue is raised in relation to a national health initiative, and we haven't talked about that here today. But we know that access to quality healthcare is an issue for all societies, and it is an issue for ours. We have pockets of both excellence as well as pockets of problems. A national health initiative would be very expensive if we would like to get, first world standard of healthcare for everyone. If that's going to come from VAT, that would probably be quite appropriate, perhaps, because it would be loading it on those parties that would be the principal benefits.
We'll mention and talk about the national health issue and social services in a second. I just want to conclude this issue around taxes. An increase in the fuel levy. Are you a smoker, Paul?
No.
Oh, good for you. You won't be paying more for cigarettes. Are you a gambler, Paul?
Never.
No, not after this new gambling tax. So, sin taxes, a new gambling tax. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's government looking for all possible sources of additional revenue, and it will get worse as we move forward. In fact of the matter, I think that government will probably make use of other sources of taxation which we may not think of as being a tax. I mean, the toll roads would be one, the carbon tax was another one, and going forward I think we're going to see more and more of that as government is trying to get as much as it can to service the services.
We had an amalgam of sort of funds being mentioned, some money towards the Kula Enterprises, a microfinancing fund, all of it sort of in the region of R1 billion South African rands towards SME support. Many are saying that's just not good enough.
Well, it's a lot more than we've had in the past. SME support, reduction of red tape for SMEs and corporates in general, those two items were top of our expectations list. It's the two areas where we expected the most dramatic changes. And because of that, perhaps our expectations were slightly disappointed. But he has made an effort in terms of addressing the plight of SMEs. He has also mentioned the informal sector, and we believe that part of the solution to fixing the SME component of our economy, which has suffered substantially during the crisis, is to move informal business into the formal sector. We also look forward to Kula making progress on its initiatives. We're very aware of what they're going to do. We've been chatting to them over the last year. Their initiative in terms of making SME finance more accessible has the potential to make a huge difference. So it's not really about the absolute allocation, but what that allocation is going to do and what it's going to create. The key challenge in that environment is that there's a lot of funding available through various sources, the IDC, Kula, and so on. And the SMEs, on the other hand, find those institutions removed from their daily lives. They can't access it. And the Chamber tries to facilitate that access. We talk to those agencies all the time. And as I said earlier, we're particularly keen on the Kula initiative. So we will continue to work with them to make sure that initiative becomes a reality.
SMEs, Dr. Botha, account for almost 80% of employment, formal and informal. There is a sense that they should really get a lot more government support.
Absolutely. I was just thinking that we really need an effort from government to focus on small business. It's very well to talk about that from time to time and mention it in the budget and next year and the year after that, but it should go beyond that. That's where we can create jobs, and that's where it should be created.
Right. Social services, Paul, let's raise this issue of the national health insurance to be rolled out in 14 years' time, to be funded through the increase of VAT, a payroll tax, and other things like carbon taxes. He did mention initially a family health care program.
Look, 14 years is a long time. So I think having recognized that there's been quite a lot of pushback in a policy environment and quite a lot of anxiety about costs, the initiative now has shifted to one of saying, well, look, let's just sort of work at what we've got. I was a bit disappointed by some comments from Aaron Motsoaledi, the health minister, in recent days, where he heavily criticized the private healthcare industry, both from a cost point of view and in terms of some of the issues that happen there. Because for me, I mean, that is the model. If we could all have access to that level of healthcare, that should be so lucky. But you know, I think we've got to work with what we've got first. So 14 years is maybe a good sort of time frame, because there's a lot of fixing to do in some of the existing facilities.
I mean, the National Healthcare Plan is still in design, but now it's just the building blocks, for instance, like this family healthcare plan. But in general, social services, education, healthcare, welfare, accounted for over 58% of this budget. Is that feasible, justifiable?
We always advocate for more spending on the economy, supporting economic development rather than throwing money into the social aspect of the budget. Politically, you have to balance the two because we're in a transition phase towards a point, hopefully, where our economy can take care of those social challenges. And while we're in that transition phase, government has to ensure that the people who suffer those social and economic challenges are taken care of. But our strong lobbying position has always been that we place more emphasis on the economic development side rather than the social side, because quite frankly, from a long-term point of view, and this is not a popular view, but it's an economic fact, that you're almost throwing money down a pit because there's no return on that investment. So the only way to ensure that there's a sustainable redress of the plight of those who are suffering on the social side is to boost the economy and ensure that the economy takes care of them.
Right. A quick comment from you on this one, the social aspect of the budget?
Yeah, I think we're reaching a point where we really would not be able to carry on with the increases that we've seen recently. I think from last year to this year, we had 2 million extra people ending up with getting government support, standing at about 15 million at the moment, out of a population of 50 million. So that's 30% of the population getting welfare support. That's clearly not sustainable going forward. Looking at the budget for this year, housing will increase at about 11%. That's acceptable, and the multiplier effect of that will be important. But economic affairs will only increase by 2.1%, and that's very low, and it's difficult to tie that number with the emphasis that in general is placed on creating jobs.